Donald Trump and his lawyers have already destroyed any possible argument they can make in court to try to defend Trump's new 15% tariffs against the world. As I'm sure you know by now, after Donald Trump lost the case before the Supreme Court and they struck down his tariffs against the world under a 1977 statute called IEEPA, Donald Trump then had a temper tantrum and then imposed 15% tariffs against the entire world under the Trade Act of 1974, Section 122. Now, the big problem for Trump invoking Section 122 is that it doesn't apply at all to a circumstance involving so-called trade deficits, which Donald Trump is complaining about. And Donald Trump's lawyers argued before the Court of International Trade, the Federal Circuit Court, as well as the United States Supreme Court, that Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974 doesn't apply. Specifically, the federal judges and the justices then on the Supreme Court asked Donald Trump's lawyers, does Section 122 apply instead of the statute that you've been using to impose tariffs against the world, IEEPA? Can you use Section 122? And Donald Trump's lawyer said, nope, Section 122 cannot be invoked at all. That would be unlawful. So what does Donald Trump do after the IEEPA emergency tariffs against the world were struck down by the Supreme Court? He invokes Section 122. What I also want to discuss with you in this video is that Trump has also created all of the evidence against himself to strike down these new 15% tariffs against the world. You know how Donald Trump has made up that the United States has received trillions and trillions of dollars already in 2025, he claimed, from these countries because they just want to give him all their money. Remember, he said he's collected $17 trillion, $18 trillion, $22 trillion. Well, by you making those statements, you are also demonstrating that there is not any balance of payment system controversy that would be needed to invoke Section 122, because you're saying all these countries are giving you their money and that America's never been stronger, so you have no basis to invoke Section 122 as well. Trump is going to lose yet again all of the cases that are going to be brought against him starting today based on his unlawful invocation of Section 122. And one of the things I want to highlight as well as it relates to the markets, by Donald Trump invoking Section 122, he's essentially saying the United States is in a Great Depression level crisis right this second. By invoking it, he's admitting that the United States economy is worse than it's ever been before. Folks, Section 122, which was created in 1974 after something called this big kind of Nixon financial crisis situation and the Bretton Woods system, which I'll talk about in just a moment. But the statute was created in 1974 to deal with potential currency manipulation, to deal with a potential run on gold, which never ended up happening. Nixon ended up imposing tariffs for a short period of time, and then certain situations were resolved back in the early 70s. But this statute has never been invoked before, ever. Through lots of crises that the United States have had, whether it's through the 80s, the dot-com bust, whether it was the Great Recession, this has never been invoked. And so by invoking it, you are also admitting that the United States basically is having a Great Depression level crisis, the scale of which has never been seen before. And that's not a good look for the United States. So let's just do what we do here on the Midas Touch Network and go point by point. Let's bring out the receipts. So Neil Katyal, you know Neil, he's been on the show before. He was the lawyer who argued the case to the Supreme Court and the lower courts that ultimately struck down Donald Trump's tariff tariffs against the world under the IEEPA statute. And Katael explains, it seems pretty hard for Donald Trump to rely on this 15% statute, Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974, when his Department of Justice in our case told the court the opposite. Now, this is a direct quote from Trump's lawyers. Nor does Section 122 have any obvious application here, where the concerns the president identified in declaring an emergency arise from trade deficits, which are conceptually distinct from balance of payment deficits. And Katael explains, look, if Donald Trump wants sweeping tariffs, he should do the American thing and go to Congress. He controls both branches of Congress and the executive branch, so pass a law if you want tariffs against the world. Persuade Congress if you think this is such a good idea. As Peter Bresnan explains, Section 122 of the 1974 Trade Act, which I'll explain to you in just a moment, on which Trump's 10% tariff is based, does not apply in the current macro environment. A balance of payment deficit is not the same thing as a trade deficit. What Trump has been complaining of is a trade deficit with other countries. Section 122 of 1974 deals with balance of payment deficits, and I'll explain again what that means in a moment. You cannot have a balance of payment issue if you have a flexible exchange rate, as the U.S. currently does, or if, as Donald Trump says, he's bringing in all this money and we've never been richer. As Steve Leisman explains, I'd like to submit that declaring a balance of payments crisis to enact tariffs under Section 122 is not the best look for the United States. We need to attract billions in capital daily. In a payment crisis, foreigners pull their money out, interest rates soar, and currencies collapse, none of which is happening. So Trump is saying that everyone's pulling their money out of our country. That's a balance of payment crisis that you need to invoke 1974, right? So by invoking it, he's saying money's being pulled out, but he's going on TV and saying money is being poured in. Do you get what I'm saying? He's saying we're receiving trillions, but for there to be this balance of payment crisis, it would mean that people are pulling their money out and you're having a currency collapse. And that's not what's happening. And Steve Leisman explains, it's like going to the bank, declaring you're broke and that you've lost your job, but that they should give you the loan anyway. And you can't have a balance of payment crisis when foreigners are supposedly investing trillions of dollars into your economy, as Donald Trump says, but consistency is never his strong suit. So if you take a look right here, this is Section 122 of the 1974 Trade Act. And here's where it says you can invoke this section to do 15% tariffs against the world. It has to be blanket basically against the world. And it could only last 150 days, but you have to have these predicate situations in order to invoke it. Whenever fundamental international payment problems require special import measures to restrict imports. So what are the fundamental international payment problems? That doesn't exist. And by Trump's own words, there isn't one. We've never been richer. We're in the golden age. We've brought in trillions of dollars. That's what he says. So then it is to deal with large and serious United States balance of payments deficits, to prevent imminent and significant depreciation of the dollar in foreign exchange markets, or 3, to cooperate with other countries in correcting an international balance of payment disequilibrium. And then you can do a temporary import surcharge not to exceed 15% for a period of up to 150 days. So the United States has never, since 1974, experienced a balance of payment crisis severe enough to invoke Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974. Now, if you're just curious, why was this enacted? Well, it was enacted in 1974, partly in response to President Richard Nixon's 1971 imposition for a short period of time of a 10% supplemental import duty. It was called the Nixon shock during a genuine balance of of payment and monetary crisis under the fixed exchange rate Bretton system that existed post-World War II. So Nixon used authority from something called the Trading with the Enemy Act, not Section 122, and the duty